Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob Cywes, the Carb Addiction Doc. A while ago, we asked folks to post questions and we'll try to answer them. And there's been an overwhelming response. So in each little micro episode, I'm going to take on one question and give it my best go as a response. Some stuff I know, some stuff I don't, some stuff I'll guess at and I'll let you know what. The first question comes from Alison Wilkins Savant. Thank you for your videos. Part 1 and 2 on carb addiction just made so much sense. And please go back to my YouTube channel, Carb Addiction Doc, and look at those. I was able to switch my thinking very quickly after watching those. Before, I hadn't been able to kick my carb habits because I was trying to eliminate, not eliminate. Anyhow, I feel I am in ketosis after 6 weeks, wondering if I should be counting carbs and macros to lose more quickly. Right now, I just shoot for 0 carbs, fat fortify my protein, and have my bridge throughout the day, eat typically 2 times a day. Probably have more cheese and nuts than I should, but not sure since I'm not tracking anything. Should I cut back on dietary fat once in ketosis to utilize more body fat, or will that happen with a longer fast? Alison, thank you so much for this question. It touches on so much. And I think one of the first concerns that I have I love what's happening in the ketogenic movement, but there are just too many keto evangelists. And the concern that I have with that is that people are looking at the ketogenic diet, D-I-E-T, and the most important part of the word diet are the first 3 letters. Diets do not last. Diets do not last. Diets fail. And I don't care what the diet is, 98% of diets fail. Okay? Nobody should ever do a diet. If there's a problem, if you've gained weight or if you're diabetic, the goal is, or the objective is to change your lifestyle, to change the fundamental ways in which you live your way of life to get rid of the disease and improve how you manage things. And every bad thing that we do had a good purpose at some stage. So we have to understand the value of the wrong thing we did, as well as the liability, remove the bad thing to remove the liability, but replace the value that it had. And the word diet is about instant results and instant success. And I hate that. This has to be a lifelong continuum, because there is no such thing as maintenance. So to get to the specifics of your question, first of all, I agree with you. Do not count anything. This is a continuum of change. At first, let me rephrase that. I don't want you to eat or drink anything unless you absolutely know what the carbohydrate content is to educate yourself. But over a very short period of time, where I am right now, I don't know the exact number of carbohydrates in anything I eat, but I know absolutely whether I should or shouldn't, and that's binary. And it's based on my preemptive knowledge of the carbohydrate content of what I was eating. So don't count macros, don't count micros. Rely on your body. And part of the whole ketogenic way of life is to allow your body, in a feedback manner, to control how much and how often you eat. Your job is not to let your brain get in the way of that. So when a fat person says, I'm hungry, it's never a nutritional requirement. It's usually this thing that needs a moment of relief. And our moment of relief comes from carbohydrates, and we call that hunger. Ask yourself, how often do you need a cigarette? Oh, I really need a cigarette. Well, if you don't smoke, it's never. But if you're a smoker, it's about every 20 minutes. So understand that concept. Never count macros, never count micros. But be aware of the types of foods that give you what you want. And the starting point, is a carnivore diet. Eggs, cheese, meat, fish, poultry. That's the starting point. And this is the way I start my ketogenic diet. Start with a carnivore diet and then add in elements that you believe are necessary. So you start with eating carnivore once a day, 1 meal a day, pure carnivore. Now you can back off from that. You can add certain vegetables. You can add certain leafy vegetables. You can even add certain starchy vegetables in. If you're fat or diabetic, my advice is never eat potatoes, never eat rice, never eat grains. But the rest of the vegetables, you can add them back as you choose to. You can add back extra meals. You can go too mad. You can decide how you want to do that. But the principles for me are no carbohydrates that are intentional and no snacks. A snack is always an emotional event. So if you're going to put calories in your mouth, that's a meal. And I certainly don't want most people eating more than 2 meals a day. Some people, 3 might be okay. But be very aware of where you are. And if you want to move forward, go back to the starting principle, which is OMAD carnivore. And then the only other piece of eating is to eat sequentially. And that the battleground there is really giving your body a chance to have a feedback response. So most of us eat with our brains, eat with our eyes. We assume or we think about how much we think we need to eat, because in the carbohydrate era, there's no biologic feedback. And we put that amount in front of us on a plate and we eat very quickly before signaling has had a chance to happen, or we override signaling and we overeat. The goal here of eating sequentially is to put the food in the middle of the table or develop other strategies that slow you down. You eat a small amount with a little bit of fat on it, preferably soluble fat, and you eat slowly, and slowly over time you recognize the situation, not where you're full, but where you're beginning to get full. And as you begin to get full, get up, go for a little walk. And when you come back to the table, typically for me, because I'm eating back and forth, my plate is empty, there's more food sitting in the middle of the table, but I'm feeling fuller now than I was 2 minutes ago when I got up. So I take that food, I put it back in the fridge. If I really get hungry, not this hungry, but this hungry, I know it's in the fridge, but guess what? It won't happen because your body's telling you full. If you really are super hungry, you want to step back, go for a little walk, and figure out what the emotion is that's traumatizing you to need crystal meth to deal with it. Okay? So eating sequentially lowers your caloric load while still feeling completely satisfied. But I don't care how much you eat at a meal, as long as you're not sitting there for 3 hours or eating like a Rottweiler having breakfast, going blah, 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 and it's gone. Okay? So the principles are: number 1, carnivore; number 2, OMAD; number 3, eating sequentially. And as long as you got those 3 principles, you can then add in or subtract as you need to. So right now it's February. This month, I'd found myself going a little bit sideways. So I just said, hey, you know what? For this month, I'm pure carnivore OMAD. And it's fine. I've got my bridge right here. Here's my black coffee. It's got a little bit of whole milk in it, but it's either black or got whole milk in it. But there's my coffee. I'm sipping on that through the day. I'll eat tonight for the first time. I've walked back to the starting phase. Now, next month, I may have some vegetables when I go out. I may introduce that. I may have a second meal. But I'm in charge of what that looks like to get me the results. No counting, nothing else, just those principles. I hope that clarifies and really simplifies what you're doing. A couple of principles can last forever because this has to become a way of life. So this next question is also on Facebook. It comes from Amy Matt Gambler. And she says, 17 years post Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, they took the gallbladder at the same time. Important statement. Been following keto for about 2 years now, struggling with veggies, so I was super happy to hear carnivore is an option. However, steak and eggs make me super sick, so I just typically eat grass-fed ground beef burgers with butter. Any other suggestions? Do I need some type of supplement? Thank you, by the way, for your posts. I first heard you on the Low Carb MD podcast. Your views on carb addiction rocked my world. Finally, somebody who gets the struggle. Thank you, Amy. And I think this is so important for people that have had bariatric surgery of any kind. The objective of all bariatric surgery, for the most part, is to reduce how much you can eat. So therefore, from a nutritional perspective, you want to get bang for buck from what you eat, which again, the ideal bang for buck is carnivore, which includes eggs, cheese, meat, fish, poultry. You can eat organs, you don't have to. But that is bang for buck, your best place to get protein and fat as well as the micronutrients from. And because you've only got a small stomach, the whole design of that small stomach is to hold only a tiny amount of food. And it should be about the size of 1, maybe 2 boiled eggs, that equivalent. Now, if you're snacking all day long, or if you're drinking your calories, you can consume massive amounts. A few M&Ms here, a few peanuts there. By the end of the day, it's a massive amount. So the easiest way to beat your restrictive surgery is to snack or drink your calories. If you eat solid food and that's the only caloric source, you're going to eat a small amount and you're going to lose the weight and maintain it. So the more carnivorous you can be, the better. But you don't have to. You can also eat vegetables as long as, so I will go from pure carnivore with my surgical patients all the way across to vegetarian as long as you are comfortable eating some renewable sources of animal products. And the two that I use are cheese, dairy, and eggs. Both are renewable, in other words, the animal doesn't die, but those are vital sources of micro and macronutrients, particularly fat and some of the micronutrients that you don't get on a plant-based diet. And if you're willing to do that and add some oils, olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, and stay the hell away from grains, potatoes, and rice, you're going to be just fine from a surgical perspective. And even our surgical patients, the most ridiculous thing I hear surgeons tell their patients, eat multiple small meals a day. They encourage you to snack, and a snack is always an emotional event. You never get an ebb and flow, you never get restoration of hormonal sensitivity. Too mad is what I encourage my bariatric surgery patients to do. 2 meals a day. You don't have to eat more than that unless you're so restricted you can't consume food. And that's one of the reasons I'm not a fan of gastric bypass as a primary operation. Now, the second thing is exclusive to gastric bypass patients. A lot of the time in the old days, we took the gallbladder out. Or if you've lost your gallbladder, the gallbladder stores bile, and when you eat a large fatty meal, the way that your body handles that fat is to mix it with bile, and that gets absorbed into the lymphatics. But the fact that you don't have a gallbladder doesn't mean you're still not producing bile. And after a meal, the liver actually produces a lot of bile. And when you can't eat very much, even if it's high fat, you're not going to get into a lot of trouble. If you do, back away a little bit from the high fat, but you should not modify the amount of fat you're eating all because you've lost your gallbladder. But see how you feel, and you can slowly train yourself to eat a little bit more. Sure, some people don't like eggs, some people don't like red meat. You can still eat fish, you can still eat shellfish, you can still eat turkey, chicken, duck. You can eat red meat, pork, lamb if you choose to. There's a variety of different things in the animal kingdom. And the human body may not like certain things, but it's not allergic to most of them. Yes, you can get allergies to dairy, you can get allergies to eggs, but those are way overplayed. And not liking something is not necessarily allergic to it. The allergies can be measured. So those are important concepts to understand, but you can modify that according to who you are. There's certain things I just don't eat. Okay? So that's fine. But there's enough for me to eat to not worry about what I don't eat. And that's an important concept. So don't worry about the fact that your gallbladder is not there, but recognize that you may have some issues with fat. Train your body slowly over time, or eat in a way that you can still give yourself that fat. And the way to do that is to decrease your soluble fat and eat more of the solid fat. So cut back a little bit maybe on the butter and the oils, but increase the amount of cheese you eat, increase the amount of egg yolks you eat. That's a way to solve that little problem. The other concern specifically with duodenal switch and gastric bypass, and this is an awful situation. One of the reasons I hate these operations, even though they cause the most rapid weight loss, they also cause by far the longest term complications. So you don't want to exchange the disease of obesity and diabetes for the disease of malnutrition. But if you've already been down that pathway, unfortunately, you are going to have to supplement metabolically because you cannot absorb enough from the food that you are eating. So number one, eat the highest metabolic content food. And the ideals for me, if you can, are eggs and liver, as well as the other spectrum of food, whole animals and liver. The next part about this is what supplements should you take? Well, the first focus is on vitamins A, D, E, K. Those are your 4 fat-soluble vitamins. And vitamins should always be eaten with food, because you cannot absorb A, D, E, K if you haven't eaten fat. They get absorbed in that biomass cell. So eat your vitamins with your food. Don't take them as a separate pill, separate from food. The second thing is salt. Salt is critically important, and the best salts are the pink salts, real salt or Himalayan salt, because they contain potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sodium. Sea salt is typically just sodium chloride and a whole bunch of plastic. Plastic, I said that, microplastics. So preferentially eat the pink salts and add it liberally to your body. Number one, your sodium content of your bloodstream very, very rarely moves more than around 140, and you can eliminate massive amounts of salt. Do not be afraid of salt. Do not be afraid of salt. The second part is your B vitamins. Most of them can be absorbed even in a gastric bypass or a switch patient. However, B12 has to be given either under the tongue as a squirt or preferably as an injection once or twice a month. Don't overdose, so check your B levels on a regular basis, but probably once a month is an injectable. Unfortunately, that for the rest of your life. And you do need to monitor that side of things. The greatest problem with the switch and the bypass are your minerals and your micronutrients. Because we really have no way of knowing how much zinc, how much magnesium, how much manganese, how much selenium your body really needs, how much chrome. It needs a little bit, but we have no idea of the absorption, and it's very, very difficult to measure. So it is not unreasonable to supplement some of those, but the best bang for buck of those is in eating animal products, particularly whole animals, oysters, mussels, eggs, that type of thing. Animals that used to be in existence where you eat the whole thing. If you can eat that with the small fish, the sardines, the anchovies with their heads. I know that sounds disgusting in America, but elsewhere in the world, people kind of eat real food. Okay, so if you're comfortable with that, get into that. And the liver is probably the biggest bang for buck. Think of liver as your best source of minerals and vitamins, much better than what they can sell you at GNC. So hopefully that helps you. But in anybody considering obesity surgery, I applaud you for thinking about it, but the two conditions are important. Number one, do not have it because you don't want to do a ketogenic diet. Do it to help you to do a ketogenic diet better. Number one. Number two is stay the hell away from a gastric bypass or a duodenal switch. Stay away from the metabolic surgeries. If you're doing a ketogenic diet, which most bariatric surgeons will never talk to you about, if you're doing a ketogenic diet, a sleeve or a band or even a balloon may be the better tool for you because the liability isn't there. But I see a third of my practice, I see people who have failed or are metabolic train wrecks from a gastric bypass or a duodenal switch. Do not put yourself in those conditions. And the surgeons love to tell you, oh, if you've got reflux, the best operation is a bypass. If you've got diabetes, the best operation. Yeah, those are good operations for the first year. But unless you're planning on dying a year after your surgery, if you're planning on living longer, do not let them convince you about those two surgeries. That's my 2 cents worth. Thank you, Amy, for the question. This one comes again from Allison, and the statement is this. A friend has recently turned me on to the work of Dr. Mindy Peltz and Dr. Daniel Pompa. I don't know either of those two people. They advocate keto, but with diet variation, cycling between feast and famine. Basically throwing in higher carb days, either weekly, monthly, or seasonally with IF, intermittent fasting, and keto at all other times. Higher carb meaning about 100 grams of carbohydrates with sweet potatoes, fruit, etc., not junk or processed food. They say once we are fat adapted, this is how our body functions best because this is how our ancestors ate, which makes sense with a hunter-gatherer model. Sometimes food was scarce and sometimes abundant. What are your thoughts on this? They claim it can help with weight loss stalls and that it is not a good idea for the body to stay in ketosis exclusively. All right, Allison. If you are one of those pretty much extinct people, not so much extinct, but people who does not have a problem from an obesity perspective, is highly insulin sensitive, has never been diabetic or has insulin resistance, if you're one of those rare people, and about 25% of America are those rare people, absolutely fine. For anybody that has had a significant weight problem, has diabetes or any other metabolic diseases, that proposal is absolutely 100% horse shit. Absolutely ridiculous. Okay? So, why do I say that? And I want to be absolutely 100% adamant that that is the single worst thing you can possibly do. Because that is, if you just change directions once a little bit. Remember, my name or my label is the CarbAddictionDoc. So let's just change perspective. If we say, okay, when an alcoholic has been sober for 2 years, they can start having a beer every now and then. They can have a little bit of alcohol every now and then, as long as it's not whiskey. And if they do it every now and then get back on track, they're going to be just fine. Absolute bullshit. Addiction is addiction. And these two doctors, and I'm going to do a podcast on this in a little bit, it's about moderation. And Gary Taubes, I'm going to read you his little sentence. It's so cool. And Gary's a buddy of mine, but he says this. He says, to break away from the dogma has to fail you in some way. My understanding of epidemiology is that we look at what healthy people eat compared to what unhealthy people eat, and then assume that if we all eat like healthy people, we'd be healthy too. The problem is we are not them. We are people who get fat and sick eating the foods that they eat. We are people with a carbohydrate addiction, and you cannot manage addiction with moderation. So the people that are giving that advice, Dr. Mindy Peltzer and Dr. Daniel Pompa, are either people that are capable of a moderate diet, sustaining a moderate diet. In other words, they've never been fat, or they are fat and ignorant and in a state of complete denial of their own addiction to carbohydrates. And yes, I'm aggressive about this because the thing that has undermined and killed so many of my patients is when they come to me and we talk about addiction and they go back to their trusted endocrinologist, their trusted cardiologist, who says, oh no, moderation is the way to go. Well, every addict is looking for permission to do their drug of choice. If I managed a heroin addict by saying, oh, you can use a little bit of heroin on Tuesdays, but don't use it any other time, of course they're going to turn blue and die. And exactly the same for someone like myself. If I grant myself permission to eat a carbohydrate, that is called a relapse. And I don't come back from a relapse before 30 pounds and 3 months have passed. I've played that game a few times, and it has crippled me every single time. This is an addiction problem, not a weight or a calorie or a food problem. And yes, if you're capable of moderation, don't come and see me. You're perfect the way you are. I can't help you. But if you've been fat diabetic or have metabolic disease, treat this as an addiction. And do not give yourself the opportunity to re-access carbohydrates, because that's called a relapse. The next question comes from Karen Osler Keeler. Actually, that's probably Karen, but I speak English, so it's Karen for me. Thank you so much for your videos. I was so excited to see you speak at Keto Summit. My question relates to glucose levels for someone with type 2 diabetes who eats a 0 or very low, less than 5 gram carbohydrate diet. I consume about 1.5 to 2 pounds of meat per day, usually 2 to 3 eggs and ghee for frying and serving. Currently, my fasting glucose ranges between 150 and 175 from the increased protein. I know I need to increase fats and lower protein, but I don't know how, other than eating spoonfuls of ghee from the jar. Do you have any recommendations? Thank you very much. Thank you for that great question, Karen. And this is so important to understand, is how much should we eat and how do we allow our bodies to regulate how much we do eat. As I've said before, most of us are trained to eat with our eyes. We eat with our brain and our eyes. We think about how much we think we need to eat. We put that amount of food in front of us and we eat it until it's all gone. And if you eat quickly, you can override the early beginning parts of the signaling back to your brain. Because the greatest fear for us is, oh, I'm going to be hungry if I don't overeat. And reversing that concept is so important. So as a type 2 diabetic, if your blood sugars are actually that high, we have one of two problems. Okay, either you're not a type 2 diabetic, you're either a LADA or a type 1, and it is critically important that you get your doctor to check your C-peptide and your insulin number. And no matter whether you're on medication or not, if your C-peptide is radically below 1, you're probably or possibly a type 1 diabetic. If your C-peptide is above 1.5 or 2, you are still insulin resistant, and your body remains resistant to the effect of insulin, which you probably producing which you are producing in an adequate amount. Your body's just resistant to it. So I'm assuming the latter, that your body is still insulin resistant, because under insulin resistance, that's where your blood sugar goes up and stays up. So the way I would begin to correct that, number one, fat fortify, but do not fat load. I think the danger is that people on a ketogenic diet feel that they can eat as much fat as they want to. Not true. The ideal thing is just to select food that has a high fat content, maybe dark meat of chicken with a skin, maybe a ribeye steak, maybe some liver, maybe some eggs with a yolk, maybe some salmon. And if you fry it in a little bit of butter, a little bit of ghee, a little bit of olive oil, a tiny amount, that's enough. You don't have to add globs of ghee or globs of butter. You don't have to add MCT oil to your coffee, all that kind of garbage. That's fat loading. And that is problematic. Yes, it can get you into ketosis, but you don't want to come into ketosis here. You want to come into ketosis from your own fat. And as long as you're blocking fat release because you're eating so much fat, you're blocking the insulin sensitivity of your own fat cells. And yes, your fat cells can become insulin resistant or insulin sensitive, just like the rest of your body. Remember, insulin regulates release of fat from your bloodstream, that is from your fat cells. So that's an equally important condition, as well as removing sugar from the bloodstream. So you want to actually undereat the amount of fat, but here's the key thing: keep the percentage of fat very high. The percentage of fat you should be eating should be around 65 to 80% of the calories, not the grams, the calories. And remember that fat is 9 calories per gram, protein's 4 calories per gram. The next thing is, I think you are correct. I think under the conditions of insulin resistance, your glucagon is unregulated. Remember, insulin should regulate glucagon under the conditions of insulin sensitivity. But if you are insulin resistant, glucagon is producing huge amounts of sugar, even though your blood sugar is high, because it's not regulated by insulin. Okay? So the problem then is that all that protein becomes a substrate, becomes a source for gluconeogenesis, and you're turning all that protein into sugar. So I would do a radical reduction in the amount of protein you're eating. And I know this is going to sound a little paradoxical. One of the ways to do that is to eat leafy vegetables, to eat a significant amount of your food as leafy vegetables, preferably leafy green vegetables, preferably in the raw or mildly heated case, and then add a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of butter to those vegetables. But for a while, if you can be more leafy vegetable based and vegetarian based, and maybe just have a little bit, a much, much smaller amount of protein and fat from the animal kingdom, that may restore insulin sensitivity. Now, don't have to do that forever, but the goal here is to get insulin sensitive. And you can fill up very quickly from a large amount of vegetables where you haven't eaten a major caloric load, because the problem with eating 1.5 to 2 pounds of meat, that's probably more meat than I eat in 3 days. And I'm probably a little bit bigger than you. So you're still overeating, and I don't want you to go into the starvation seco model. So eat till you're full, but if you're getting full on stuff that really has no caloric value, high fat, low protein, that may help to get you there. So get used to, or get your blood profile measured, particularly C-peptide and insulin. If you are a true type 2, cut back on your protein load, increase your fat percentage, but decrease your overall fat load. And maybe the way to go, if you can't cut back on that, eating a cow a day, go toward the vegetable side a little bit for a while, and then go pure carnivore. But I think that also, if you adopt the eating sequentially pattern, where you put that meat in the middle of the table and you eat super slowly, one bite at a time, you may find that you can get by with half a pound a day rather than 2 pounds a day. Hopefully that helps. I'd love for you to report back if you manage that, because really the goal of this is to be as comfortable without deprivation. You've already deprived yourself of the carbohydrates. Now let's see if we can restore over time that insulin sensitivity and that fat adaptation. Let me know. I'd love for you to give me some feedback in about 3 months if you're able to do this. Thanks for the question. Another question on Facebook from Silky Volchek or Volkek Barrow. 2 tough names, I don't speak German, and a nice good old English name. My husband is taking statins 3 times a week. He is miserable. His whole body hurts and he looks really run down. His cholesterol is 120 and I'm really concerned about his health. Also, how can you find out about Crohn's disease? When I read people's symptoms, a lot of them fit. So thanks for that question, Silky. Good question. Number one, I don't believe, and I'm not wearing my doctor hat here, this is just Robert Cywes speaking, I don't believe there is a need for statins in any human being. Well, if you've got shares in a statin company, sell statins to everybody. But outside of that, please don't do that. I recently read a paper from the Mayo Clinic that was published in BMJ in December of 2019, where the statin industry is going to earn 2 trillion pounds, British pounds, in 2020 off the sale of statins. So don't try to argue with the doctor that put you on the statins. Make a decision for yourself. And they may listen to their opinion, because their opinion may be more important than mine. They're going to have very logical reasons why you should continue to take the statins. My approach is this. Number one, statins do not treat something that causes disease. If you believe LDL, especially LDL-B, the small, tiny, empty particles, cause disease, sure, take your statin. Okay? My understanding and my knowledge and the evidence that I have is that it is glucose and nicotine that causes vascular damage. Okay? And when you're eating a lot of glucose, your liver converts glucose into triglycerides that float free in the body. So typically when you're a high carbohydrate eater, your body is turning that excess sugar into triglycerides that then float through the bloodstream, connected to a protein free in the bloodstream to the fat cells, where they get taken up by the fat cells. Okay? So when you eat a lot of carbohydrates, your triglycerides are high. When you're transporting most of your fat as triglycerides, you do not need to transport fat, the longer chains of triglycerides which come from the consumption of fat and from your fat cells. You do not need to transport them in the transport barge, because the fat is floating free in the bloodstream. Think about cars on a highway transporting people versus buses on the highway transporting lots of people, okay? So the glucose to triglycerides is like a bunch of cars transporting people. However, when you have more complex fat, you're going to transport those people in buses. So what happens is the empty bus comes to the bus stop, which is your fat cell, picks up fat, and then fills up with a whole bunch of fat. And then the big fluffy molecules, the LDLAs, which are now full of people, the buses that are full of people, then float around the body. So you've either got empty buses or full buses floating around the body. The way most people measure LDL is not the A particle or the B particle. They measure a calculated LDL, which is A plus B. So it's the addition of the two. And you don't know whether it's the A or the B predominantly. But here's how you will know, okay? If you eat glucose, you're transporting most of your people in cars called triglycerides. So if your triglycerides are high, the assumption is that you don't need to transport people in buses, so therefore your buses are all empty, and you've got a bunch of LDL-B particles there. And remember, the injury comes from sugar harming the blood vessels. So when your triglycerides are high, that is the best marker, the single best marker. It doesn't cause damage, but it's the single best marker of damage mediated by glucose. And when your triglycerides are high, your LDL-B particles, the empty buses, are high. So therefore, a high B particle is associated with injury. It's a marker of vascular injury because it's a marker of high glucose. Okay? Now, if your triglycerides are low, and I usually use 75 as my mark, if your triglycerides are below 75 and your LDL is high, then the majority of that LDL is probably transporting your fat in full buses. So LDLA, which is your awesome particle, it's awesome because it's full of fat. And it's this big fluffy molecule. Think about a bus full of people. Now you're not transporting people in cars. So your triglycerides are low. And if your LDL calculated is high or moderately high, with a low triglyceride, you can make the assumption that it's all A particles or awesome full buses. Okay? So the key thing about your husband is look at his triglycerides and look at his diet. If he's not eating carbohydrates, his triglycerides should be lower or lowering, and you can assume that his LDL is elevated. But we need to be using fat. If you're in ketosis, we have to use fat. So therefore, we need a lot of buses on the road. And If I'm in ketosis like I am right now and I'm fat adapted, I'm living on ketones, my blood sugar's high, my ketones are high, so I've got a lot of LDL. So expect your LDL to go up, but it's healthy LDL. It's the LDLA and the HDL, which is your removal HDL, your good, so-called good, I don't like that word, but HDL high, LDLA high, triglycerides low, perfectly healthy. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If you use the cars, the buses example, that's the way your body works. However, here's the key thing. Statins block the production of LDL. So they're taking buses off the road. That's ridiculous. The buses aren't causing damage, they're a marker of damage. Empty buses are a marker of damage caused by glucose. Don't kill the messenger, don't kill the marker. Kill the glucose. So statins, in my opinion, not as a doctor, but just as a lay guy, have no value in the treatment of people. So if you look at the true graphics, not the relative ratio, but the absolute ratio of cardiovascular disease reduction based on people on statins versus people that are not, there's really zero evidence, no evidence to prove that statins are better than no statins in cardiovascular patients. Okay? And there's several papers now out from the Mayo Clinic that prove that, or that show a lack of evidence. So the evidence that all the drug companies are using is a lie, it is false, it is statistical manipulation, it is not true. That's the starting point. What is absolutely true is that statins, depending on the type of statin, cause anywhere from 20 to 40% side effects, serious side effects. They make you feel like shit. So if you're taking a drug that has no value to you and you feel like crap, maybe you can do without the drug. So my personal position in my own life, and I'm not going to give you advice about yours, what I've done in my own life is I said, look, I'm going on a ketogenic diet. I'm going to be fat adapted. I want my triglycerides low. I want my LDL particles high, and I'm not going to take a statin. And my triglyceride, at least my LDL level, is high. It's about 140. Somewhere between 120 and 200 is my range of LDL. Most cardiologists would have a heart attack, although I'll never have a heart attack. But the key thing there, why do I want my LDL that high? Because of this thing. This thing needs fat. And the way I get fat to my brain, healthy fat to my brain, is in LDL. If I'm going to suppress my LDL with some statin, I'm not getting adequate fat to my brain, and my mom unfortunately has dementia, Alzheimer's. Yeah, it's sad to say, but I don't want to end up like her if I can possibly help it. And I may do, but I'm going to do every damn thing I possibly can with regards to my diet to prevent me from having dementia, Alzheimer's, or Parkinson's disease. So that's the rationale behind not taking a statin, behind eating a lot of fat and not consuming sugar. If your husband does that, he's giving himself, in my humble opinion, the best shot at a healthy life. You also asked a question about Crohn's disease. And Crohn's disease, as a GI surgeon, as a pediatric GI surgeon, is something I know a little bit about. In fact, I've written a book chapter about it. So Crohn's disease, we're not exactly certain what it is, but it's most likely an autoimmune disease where your immune system is attacking your body, and it is an awful, awful disease that does not go away. It fluctuates. You can get into remission, and there are a variety of immunosuppressive drug regimens that may do that. But those are kind of external to you. And Crohn's disease can occur anywhere from the mouth to the anus, and it can also have some general side effects in the rest of the body. It's a miserable disease. And Crohn's disease is diagnosed with endoscopy, where people look down, gastroenterologists or surgeons look down with a light into the stomach and small intestine, or into the colon and the lower small intestine, do biopsies, and we can diagnose Crohn's absolutely that way. The way to see whether someone is at risk for Crohn's disease or there's a likelihood of the disease is to do a dye swallow or a capsule endoscopy. You just got to be careful with a capsule endoscopy that it doesn't get stuck. But a dye test will show you diseased elements of the intestine, or you can get a CT scan that may show you the same thing. So that's the way we diagnose Crohn's disease. If you have Crohn's disease, the historical treatment for Crohn's disease was called the white diet. Now, it's not a racial thing. White diet means rice, pasta, potatoes, all the white starchy foods, and elimination of the vegetable products, the high fiber, high roughage foods, and definitely no meat. Okay? In my humble opinion, that is the disease that's the diet that most likely promotes an ongoing inflammatory system for Crohn's disease. The reason why they do that is because those refined carbohydrates all turn sloppy and slimy, and they get absorbed very high up in the intestine. So you really have nothing that is fibrous or has gristle to it that can get plugged where the intestine is narrowed by Crohn's disease. You eat, let's say, an orange with all that fiber in it, it can get plugged up. You eat some vegetables, it can get plugged up. You eat a gristly pork chop, it can get blocked up and cause an intestinal blockage that may even need surgery. So they've avoided the fibrous foods. Well, the cool part is this: carnivores do not get constipated. And the beautiful thing about the carnivore diet is that those proteins, that fat, gets broken down and gets absorbed pretty darn high up in the small intestine. Yeah, some soluble fat goes through, but it's liquid fat. It's not chunks of fat. And as long as you're not eating very gristly meats, if you're eating more of the finer meats, your fillets, your chicken, your dark meat of the chicken without the gristle, your softer fishes without the skins, you can eat a lot of fat, you can eat a lot of protein. And in my Crohn's patients that I manage, I try to get them to be as closely on a carnivore diet. Number one, they're getting all the nutrients they need, ideally. And if they're eating eggs and cheese as well, that's the ideal, to my mind, Crohn's diet. It's ultra low in inflammation. You're not getting all these polyunsaturated fat and that either come from the conversion of sugar to fat or from the consumption of the seed oils and the bad fats that are causing and promoting inflammation. You're getting the lowest inflammation diet for your Crohn's disease, so you dampen down on that. You're not eating any gluten-based foods, your grains and that kind of thing, so you're not getting the gluten antigen that is also thought to be a powerful trigger, and some of the oxalates from the vegetable material. So the more pure carnivore a Crohn's patient can be, the lower the likelihood, as long as it's not gristly, the lower the likelihood of triggering and perseverating the autoimmune disease. But remember, Crohn's disease for life, there's certain aspects you can try to control as best you can, and there's certain ways that you can't. But to my mind, a moderate dairy carnivore meal or carnivore approach is the ideal way to treat a Crohn's patient, and then also eliminating snacking, so you give time for that meal to be processed, absorbed, and eliminated. Lots of salt, by the way, lots of salt. Salt retains fluid in the intestine and softens that food up. Hopefully that helps, not just in answer to this question, but also for patients with Crohn's disease. Thank you very much for the question.